The argument burst into the quiet dining room like a sudden storm. Emma leaned forward at the table, her jaw clenched, eyes sharp as broken glass. The overhead light cast a warm glow on the polished wood, but nothing about the atmosphere felt warm. Her father, Michael, sat across from her, shoulders tense, fingers rigid around his fork. The rest of the family froze mid-movement, as if afraid that any sound might trigger another explosion. "You still think you get to decide how I live?" Emma said, her voice trembling more with emotion than volume. "You treat me like I'm incapable of making my own choices. It's embarrassing, Dad. Honestly, it's humiliating." Michael blinked, stunned by the force of her words. His eyes, always steady and reserved, flickered with something fragile. "Emma, I'm not trying to—" "You never listen," she cut in, her tone sharp enough to slice through the air. "You pretend you know what's best, but you're stuck in the last century. You don't respect who I am. You never did." The clatter of silverware stopped. The kitchen clock ticked loudly, filling the unbearable silence. Emma's grandmother, Margaret, sat at the far end, hands folded neatly, gaze lowered. Her face carried the soft wrinkles of age, but her expression held a heaviness that made Emma briefly glance her way. Just a second, just enough to see something flicker there. Michael exhaled slowly, his shoulders sinking, but his voice remained calm, painfully calm. "I'm trying to talk to you, Emma, that's all. It's a family dinner." "And you always make it about your rules," Emma snapped. "Your traditions, your way." She pushed her chair back slightly, the legs scraping against the floor. A soft gasp came from one of the relatives, but nobody dared interfere. Michael swallowed hard. His face flushed, then paled, as if he couldn't decide whether he was angry or hurt. "I'm doing my best," he said quietly. "I don't know what else you want from me." Emma's chest tightened at the vulnerability in his voice, but she refused to let herself waver. "I want you to stop pretending you know me." The tension wrapped around the table like a rope pulled tight, holding everyone hostage. Even the air felt thick, unmoving, as if the house itself was bracing for what came next. Only then did Emma notice movement at the far end of the table. Her grandmother lifted her eyes, and for the first time that night, she looked directly at Emma. There was no anger there, just a sorrow so deep, so quiet, it felt almost unbearable. It made Emma shift in her seat without understanding why. But she pushed the feeling aside. All she saw, all she allowed herself to see, was the man across from her, her father, sitting in silence, fading under the weight of her accusations. And in her mind, the battle was only beginning. Emma pushed back from the table just enough to create distance, yet not enough to walk away. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. The walls seemed to close in, carrying echoes of old arguments she thought she had buried long ago. The warm scent of roasted vegetables and buttered bread, once comforting, now felt suffocating. Michael's eyes drifted downward. He looked older than he had just minutes earlier. His usually steady hands trembled slightly against the tablecloth, a detail Emma noticed but refused to interpret. To her, everything he did felt like another performance, another attempt to claim the moral high ground. The silence stretched. No one dared move, except Margaret, who gently reached for her water glass, her fingers slow, deliberate, as though she were handling something fragile. Emma's voice broke the tension again. "You know what? This isn't new. You've been controlling my life since I was a kid." Michael lifted his head, confusion etched across his face. "I've only tried to guide you. That's what parents do." "Guide?" Emma laughed, bitter and sharp. "You mean dictate. You forced your ideas, your expectations, your traditions on me. Every time I tried to be myself, you tried to pull me back into your world." Margaret's eyes flicked from one to the other, her expression tightening, but she stayed quiet. She had always stayed quiet. Michael rubbed his forehead. "Emma, I wasn't trying to pull you back. I just wanted you to be safe. You were always so passionate. You jumped into things without thinking. I was scared you'd get hurt." Emma's stomach twisted, but she pushed past it. "You don't get to use worry as an excuse. You used fear to control everything I did. What I wore, who I spent time with, what I believed." "That's not fair," he whispered, but Emma talked over him again. "You never trusted me to make my own decisions," she said, voice rising. "You belittled my opinions every time they didn't match yours. You acted like your age made you better, like experience was a weapon." Michael looked like he had been hit. His jaw tightened and he stared at the table, eyes unfocused. The weight of the moment pressed on him like a physical force. It was in that moment that Emma felt something shift behind her. She looked toward Margaret again. This time, her grandmother wasn't looking at the plate or the table. She was looking at Michael, really looking, and he seemed to shrink under her gaze. Emma frowned. "Grandma, why are you looking at him like that?" Margaret inhaled softly, the sound barely audible. "Because," she said, in a voice so delicate it trembled in the air, "you don't know everything, querida." Emma blinked. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Margaret didn't answer, not yet. She simply placed her glass down and folded her hands again, her knuckles white from the pressure. Her silence was different this time, heavy, intentional. Michael shifted uncomfortably. His eyes flickered toward his mother, then away. Emma caught the exchange, and an uneasy tightness curled in her stomach. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, her voice cracking despite her effort to stay firm. Still, her grandmother remained quiet. And for the first time that evening, Emma felt a strange sensation, something she hadn't expected at all. A flicker of fear.
Emma straightened in her chair, the fear twisting inside her like a cold knot. She wasn't used to uncertainty. She wasn't used to silence holding more weight than words. The dining room felt colder now, as if someone had opened a window she couldn't see. Even the chandelier light seemed dimmer. Michael shifted again, his unease impossible to hide. His fingers curled and uncurled against the tablecloth, and Emma noticed how his breathing had grown shallow. His eyes never met hers. Instead, they darted toward Margaret, almost pleading. That alone made Emma's pulse quicken. "Grandma," she said again, more cautiously this time, "what do you mean I don't know everything?" Margaret lifted her eyes, and for a moment, Emma felt as if the old woman were studying her, not judging, not scolding, but trying to measure how much truth she could bear. Her gaze held decades of memories that Emma had never been invited into. "It means," Margaret said slowly, "that this argument you and your father keep circling, it didn't start tonight, and it didn't start with you." Emma stiffened. The room suddenly felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes an earthquake. Michael swallowed, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, you don't have to." But Margaret raised a hand, not sharply, but firmly enough to silence him. It was the first time Emma had seen her grandmother stop him with a gesture alone. It made her heart pound even faster. Emma's voice softened despite herself. "Please, just tell me what's going on." Margaret exhaled a long, trembling breath, as though releasing something she'd held inside for years. "Your father wasn't always this way, Emma. He didn't grow up strict. He wasn't born with rules etched into him. Life taught him to be like this. Or maybe forced him." Emma frowned, confused. She had always imagined Michael's personality as something unchangeable, a wall she had spent her entire life pushing against. The idea that it might have been built, brick by brick, unsettled her. Margaret continued, her voice fragile but unwavering. "When your mother died, he lost more than a wife. He lost himself. And he made choices, hard choices, that you never saw. Choices that scarred him." Emma felt a tightening in her throat. She hated when people used her mother's memory as a justification for anything. "Everyone loses someone," she said, though her voice lacked its previous sharpness. "That doesn't excuse him suffocating me." Margaret didn't flinch. No, it doesn't excuse, but it explains. Michael finally looked up, eyes glossy with something he fought to contain. For the first time, Emma couldn't read him. He wasn't angry, he wasn't defensive, he looked cornered and broken. But Margaret wasn't done. "You grew up thinking your father imposed rules to control you," she said. "But in truth, every decision he made after your mother passed came from fear. A fear bigger than pride, bigger than tradition, bigger than any argument you've ever had." Emma felt heat spread across her skin, a mixture of anger and something else, something she didn't want to name. "What fear?" she asked quietly. Margaret hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she clasped them together. "The fear," she said, "of losing you too." Emma froze. The words hit her like a blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. She stared at her grandmother, then at her father, at his trembling hands, the way his lips pressed together to keep a lifetime of emotion from spilling out. The room, once suffocating with confrontation, now felt suspended in a fragile, painful stillness. Emma opened her mouth to speak, anything, even a denial, but no sound came out. And for the first time that night, she didn't feel like the one holding power. She felt like the one standing on the edge of something she never saw coming, something she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Emma's breath hitched as the meaning behind her grandmother's words settled heavily over the table. The air thickened, charged with something far more dangerous than anger: truth. Truth that had been buried so deep beneath years of resentment, misunderstanding, and stubborn pride that digging it up now felt like disturbing a grave. Michael lowered his gaze again, unable to meet his daughter's eyes. His shoulders, once broad and steady, now sagged under a weight Emma had never known he carried. She had mistaken it for rigidity, for dominance, but now she wondered, was it something else entirely? "Why would he be afraid of losing me?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended, almost reluctant. "I've always been here." Margaret shook her head slowly. "No, querida. You've been present, but never close. And that distance didn't begin with your rebellion or your convictions. It began long before you understood what any of those things meant." Emma blinked, trying to grasp the implication. Her childhood felt like a collection of vague impressions, stern warnings, strict curfews, constant caution. She remembered feeling contained, not protected, guided, not understood. She never imagined there was something beneath it all. Margaret's voice drifted through the room, steady despite her trembling hands. "There was a night you don't remember. You were very young, too young to understand the danger you were in." Emma felt a chill creep up her spine. Memories flickered faintly, bright lights, muffled shouting, her father's arms clutching her too tightly. She had always assumed it was just a bad dream. "What happened?" she asked, her tone barely a whisper. Michael closed his eyes, pained. "Mom, don't." "I must," Margaret interrupted gently. "You've both carried wounds the other never saw, and it's time you stop fighting shadows." Emma leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the moment, despite every part of her insisting she shouldn't feel anything, certainly not concern. Margaret continued, "The night your mother was taken to the hospital for the last time, you disappeared. Not for hours, for minutes, but for your father, it felt like a lifetime. He found you outside, near the trees, calling for her. You almost wandered into the road." Emma's breath caught. She had no recollection of that. Margaret's eyes softened. "When he grabbed you, he thought he'd lost you." The terror changed something inside him. From that day on, he tried to shield you from everything, every risk, every danger, even from life itself. Emma felt the world tilt. For a moment, she wasn't the fierce, unwavering woman she believed herself to be. She was a child again, standing barefoot on cold ground,
her tiny hands reaching for someone who would never come back. I didn't know," she muttered, voice cracking. Michael inhaled shakily. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want that memory to shape you the way it shaped me." Emma pressed her fingers against her lips, trying to steady herself. She had always assumed his rules were about control, power, tradition. Now she saw something entirely different: fear, carved into a man who had already lost too much. Still, another emotion simmered beneath the surface: hurt. "But you could have told me," she whispered. "Instead, you turned everything into restrictions and limits. You made me feel like a problem to be managed." Michael finally met her gaze. His eyes glistened. "I didn't know how to love you without being afraid." Emma swallowed hard. Her heart thudded painfully. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet. The wound was too deep and the new truth too fresh. But something inside her shifted. Not surrender, not acceptance, but the beginning of understanding. And for the first time in years, she didn't see a tyrant across the table. She saw a man breaking apart, piece by piece, because she had finally stepped close enough to notice. Emma leaned back slightly, trying to steady the whirlpool of emotions tightening in her chest. The dining room felt smaller than before, as if the walls themselves had drawn closer to witness what was unfolding. She glanced at her father, this man she had built into a monument of stubbornness and rigidity, and saw something unfamiliar flickering behind his composure. Not authority, not pride, something raw, more fragile. But the anger inside her didn't vanish so easily. It collided with the new truth, twisting into something heavy and confusing. "So, all this time," she said slowly, "you controlled everything because you were scared? That doesn't make what you did any less suffocating." Michael nodded faintly, as though he had expected her reaction. "I know," he whispered. "Fear doesn't justify my mistakes, but it explains how I became someone I never intended to be." Emma looked down at her hands. They had always been firm, expressive, ready to defend her beliefs with fierce conviction. Now, they trembled slightly. Margaret watched them both with eyes that carried more years of pain and patience than either of them could measure. She interlaced her fingers, steadying herself. "Your father didn't only lose his wife, Emma. He lost the life he had planned, the future he imagined. Everything changed overnight, and instead of grieving, he buried himself in responsibility." Emma's voice softened despite her resistance. "Why didn't you ever tell me this, Grandma?" Margaret's gaze dimmed. "Because it wasn't my story to tell, and because your father never asked for help. He carried the weight alone, believing that was the only way to honor the woman he loved." Emma blinked hard. The sharp edges of her outrage began to dull, replaced by a lingering ache she didn't want to acknowledge. She had spent years fighting him, pushing back, assuming he was the villain in every argument. She never imagined he was fighting ghosts of his own. But old wounds don't heal simply because truth surfaces. Emma crossed her arms, trying to regain some solidity. "Okay, even if I understand why, it doesn't erase everything else. You never listened to me. You still don't." Michael's eyes filled with a quiet desperation. "I know," he said again, "and maybe it's too late to fix that, but I'm listening now." Emma scoffed lightly, though it came out weaker than she intended. "You say that, but you look at me like I'm still the little girl who almost walked into the road." Michael shook his head. "No, I look at you and see a woman who survived without needing me, and that scares me too." Emma felt something tight in her chest at the admission. It wasn't manipulation, it wasn't guilt-tripping. It was honesty, dripping from a wound that had never fully closed. Margaret leaned forward, her voice steady but urgent. "Querida, your fight with him is not about beliefs. It's about two people who never learned how to talk to each other because pain stood between them." Emma inhaled deeply, her voice trembling. I wanted him to respect me." Michael's expression softened with a grief that nearly brought him to his knees. "Emma, I always respected you. I just didn't know how to show it without feeling like I might lose you again." The room swam slightly as Emma absorbed the words. Her own heart was a battlefield, years of anger clashing with a revelation she never saw coming. She looked away, trying to keep her composure. The familiar fire inside her flickered, but it didn't burn the same way. Not after this. Still, one thought kept echoing in her mind, rising above the noise. If everything I believed about him was wrong, then what else have I misunderstood? Emma didn't want the answer, but she sensed her grandmother was getting ready to give it anyway. Margaret's silence grew heavier, settling over the table like a veil no one dared lift. Emma sensed it, another truth, deeper and sharper than the last, waiting behind her grandmother's calm posture. The flickering candles reflected in Margaret's eyes, revealing a pain that had not yet been spoken. Emma swallowed. "Grandma, what else aren't you telling me?" Margaret didn't look at her immediately. Instead, she looked at Michael, long and steady, as if asking a final, silent permission. Michael lowered his head, shoulders trembling. It was the closest thing to an answer she needed. When Margaret finally turned her gaze to Emma, her voice was soft, but strong enough to cut through the thick silence. "Your father did not only lose your mother that night, querida. He almost lost everything." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret held her hands together on the table, knuckles pale. "The hospital did not think your mother would survive, and they were concerned about you as well. Concerned enough to want to step in." Emma felt her heartbeat spike in her ears. "Step in? How?" Michael shifted in his seat, pressing a hand against his mouth, as though trying to steady himself. Margaret answered before he could. "They considered taking you away from him." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The room blurred as she tried to understand what she had just heard. What? Why would they? Why would anyone consider that? Margaret inhaled deeply. "Because your father was collapsing, Emma. He wasn't eating, he wasn't speaking, he refused to sleep. He clung to you as if letting you out of his sight for even a moment would kill him. They said his grief made him unstable." Michael's face folded inward. He didn't cry, but the devastation in his eyes said enough. Emma stared at him, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Michael exhaled shakily. "Because it was the worst moment of my life. I didn't want it to be part of yours." Emma opened her mouth, but no words came. Her father, this man she had screamed at for being rigid and controlling, had once been so undone by loss that the world tried to take her away to protect her from him. The image shattered her breath. Margaret's voice carried on gently, as if threading together pieces Emma never knew existed. "He fought, Emma. He fought harder than I have ever seen a man fight. He refused to let the world take you. He promised your mother, right there by her bedside, that he would protect you from everything, even from himself." Emma felt her stomach twist violently. Her father had never been good with words, never good with softness. But hearing this, hearing what he had endured in silence, made the walls she'd built around herself tremble. Michael rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. "I was terrified, Emma. Terrified you'd vanish the same way she did, suddenly, without warning. So I made rules, I tightened everything. I thought if I controlled the world around you, nothing could take you away." Emma felt an ache spread through her chest, slow and suffocating. Margaret leaned forward. "Your father did not become strict because he was old-fashioned. He became strict because fear shaped him into someone he didn't choose to be." Emma's throat tightened so much it hurt. Memories flashed, childhood arguments, slammed doors, that feeling of being watched too closely, protected too intensely. All her life, she had believed he wanted to control her. Now she understood he had been trying, failing, but trying, to keep her alive. "I didn't know." Michael shook his head weakly. "How could you? I never let you see me as anything other than the guardian I thought I had to be." Emma looked at him, really looked. In his eyes, she saw exhaustion, grief, love, buried under years of miscommunication, and a man who had never forgiven himself. Not for being strict, but for being human. For the first time that night, her anger didn't rise. Her heart did.
Emma's pulse thudded in her ears, each beat echoing through the painful quiet. She stared at her father, not knowing whether she should speak, cry, or run from the room. The weight of everything she just learned sat in her chest like a stone, heavy, cold, and deeply unfamiliar. Michael didn't speak. He kept his eyes lowered, as if afraid that looking at her would shatter whatever fragile balance remained between them. His hands lay motionless on the table now, no longer trembling, but still tense, as though even stillness cost him effort. Emma swallowed hard. "I grew up thinking you didn't trust me," she said, her voice faint. "I thought every rule meant you didn't believe I could make my own decisions." Michael looked up slowly, pain tightening his features. "I trusted you, Emma. I never trusted the world." The words struck her deeper than she expected. She turned slightly toward Margaret, needing some anchor in the emotional storm. "Did you know all of this? Everything he was going through?" Margaret's eyes shimmered with sadness. "I knew enough. But grief isolates people, querida. Your father didn't want help. He wanted to be strong. He believed strength was silence." Emma pressed her lips together. That she understood all too well. Silence had been the real language of their household. His silence in explaining, hers in believing no explanation existed. "Why didn't you ever talk to me?" she asked Michael, her voice trembling as the question finally clawed its way out. "Why didn't you tell me you were hurting?" Michael inhaled deeply, as if preparing to admit something he had been avoiding for years. "Because you were the only good thing I had left. I thought showing you my grief would break you, or worse, make you pity me." Emma felt her breath catch. "I wouldn't have pitied you." He shook his head. "I didn't know that. I didn't know how to let you see me without all the walls I'd put up. So instead of sharing myself, I tried to shield you, and it came out all wrong." Emma's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She had spent years crafting an identity built on strength, on independence, on fighting everything that resembled control. And all this time, she had been fighting a ghost she didn't even know existed. Memories resurfaced, moments she had buried, moments she had reinterpreted through anger. Her father waiting up for her when she came home late, his voice rising not in rage, but in fear. The way he lingered at the doorway when she left for college, unable to step closer. The birthday where he gave her a gift she mocked. She could still remember the way he had forced a smile afterward. She clenched her fists. "I blamed you for everything," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. "For every fight, for every rule, for every moment I felt small." Michael winced. "I know." Emma shut her eyes. "And you never corrected me?" "Because I didn't think I deserved to," he said, voice breaking slightly. "I thought all your anger was justified." She opened her eyes again, and this time she didn't look away. "Was it?" Michael hesitated, then shook his head gently. "No, but I understood it." Emma felt her chest tighten. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first time in her life that her father had given her an answer that felt real, honest, unfiltered. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her expression softening with relief. "You two have spent years talking around the truth. Tonight, finally, you are speaking to it." Emma turned her gaze toward her grandmother, her voice fragile. "Is this why you've been so quiet all these years?" Margaret nodded slowly. "Because I knew your father wasn't the man you thought he was, but I also knew you weren't the enemy he imagined you'd become." Emma looked down at her hands again. Her grandmother's words sank deep, unsettling old certainties she'd clung to for so long. If both of them had been wrong about each other, then what was she supposed to believe now? Her entire world, her convictions, her resentment, her identity, felt like a building with its foundations suddenly cracked open. And as she struggled to find solid ground, Margaret's steady voice broke the silence once more. "Emma," she said gently, "there's still something you haven't heard." Emma's breath faltered. Another secret.
Another unseen thread pulling at the fragile fabric of everything she thought she understood. She looked at Margaret, searching her grandmother's expression for clues, but Margaret's face revealed nothing except a calm resolve that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely holding steady. Margaret didn't speak immediately. She took a slow sip of water, as if gathering the strength to open a door that had been locked for decades. Michael didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at the tablecloth as though he feared what might come next even more than Emma did. Finally, Margaret placed her glass down and folded her hands. "You believe your father never respected who you became," she began softly. "But, querida, you don't know how often he protected you from others who didn't." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret exhaled. "Your father didn't only fear losing you to danger or tragedy, he feared losing you to bitterness. Bitterness the world wanted to put on your shoulders long before you formed any convictions at all." Emma's confusion deepened. "I don't understand." Michael's voice emerged, hoarse. "Mom?" But Margaret pressed on gently. "When you were still a teenager, Emma, there were people, family members included, who said terrible things about you. Not to your face, but behind closed doors. They said you were difficult, that you were stubborn, that you were going to cause trouble when you grew up." Emma's stomach twisted. "Who said that?" Margaret shook her head. "Names don't matter. What matters is that your father fought every one of them. He defended you when no one else did. He told them you were bright and brave and strong-willed, not a problem to be handled, but a mind to be respected." Emma felt her throat tighten. Memories flickered. Moments where relatives looked at her strangely, moments she brushed off as nothing. Had those looks meant more than she realized? "Why didn't he ever tell me?" she whispered. Michael's answer came quietly. "Because my defense shouldn't have been something you carried. It was meant to stay between adults. You didn't need to know what people said." Emma shook her head. "I wish I had known." "No," Michael said firmly for the first time that night. "You don't. I never wanted you to feel judged before you even became who you were meant to be." The firmness in his voice startled her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't control. It was protection. Real protection. Quiet, invisible, exhausting protection. Margaret continued, her voice tender. "When you began forming your identity, your beliefs, your opinions, your father didn't always understand them, but he never stopped defending your right to have them." Emma blinked rapidly. She felt something sharp inside her chest, like guilt, but heavier, messier. "I spent years thinking he hated everything about me," she murmured. Michael shook his head slowly, eyes glistening. "I was proud of you, always, even when I didn't say it, especially when I didn't say it." Emma felt her breath falter again. Pride? From him? All she could remember were arguments, tension, slammed doors. Not once had she imagined pride living anywhere beneath his rigid exterior. Margaret leaned forward. "Emma, your father didn't fear who you became. He feared losing his place in your life as you became it." Emma froze. The sentence hit her deeper than all the revelations before it. Her father hadn't been fighting her beliefs. He'd been fighting the possibility that her growing independence, her boldness, her certainty, meant she didn't need him anymore. Her voice trembled. "Is that true?" Michael's answer came so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "Yes." Emma sat back, stunned into silence. For years, she had believed that every argument, every restriction, every tension was about control. But now she saw something far more complicated. A man terrified of becoming irrelevant to the person he loved most. Her grandmother watched her carefully, then whispered, "Querida, your father's mistakes were real, but so was his love." Emma closed her eyes as another wave of emotion crashed through her. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet. But the anger she'd carried for years was no longer solid. It was dissolving, turning into something softer, something uncertain. For the first time in her life, she didn't know which hurt more: the pain she had felt, or the pain she had never seen.
Emma felt the room spinning gently, as if her thoughts had been shaken loose and now drifted around her like dust in a beam of light. Nothing felt solid anymore. Not her anger, not her assumptions, not even her own voice. She opened her eyes and stared at her father, really seeing him for the first time. Not the stern figure she'd painted in her mind, but a man carved by loss, fear, love, and mistakes. Michael seemed smaller somehow, not weaker, but human, painfully human. Emma pressed her palms against the table, grounding herself. "All these years," she murmured, "I thought you were trying to shape me into someone you wanted, but you were just trying not to lose me." Michael nodded, tears threatening but controlled. "I know I failed you in many ways, but I never stopped loving you, even when you hated me." Emma looked down, her throat tightening. "I didn't hate you," she whispered. "I hated how powerless I felt. I hated that I couldn't understand you." Michael swallowed. "And I hated that I didn't know how to reach you." Margaret leaned back in her chair, exhaustion softening her posture. Her eyes held a quiet pride, relief that the truths she had carried for so long were finally being released. Emma turned her gaze to her grandmother. "You said there was still more, wasn't there?" Margaret hesitated, her lips tightening just slightly. "Yes, querida. Something only I know. Something your father never had the courage to tell you." Michael looked up sharply, eyes wide. "Mom!" "It's time," Margaret said gently. "You've both bled enough from things left unsaid." Emma's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Margaret folded her hands neatly, gathering the strength of decades into her next words. "You believe your father became strict because of fear, and that is true. But there was another reason, one deeper than fear, deeper than grief." She paused, and in that moment, the ticking clock filled the silence with a slow, painful rhythm. "Your mother," Margaret continued softly, "saw the world changing. She worried it would swallow you whole one day. On her last coherent night at the hospital, she begged your father to promise he would raise you with values she feared would disappear, values she cherished." Emma's heart stopped. "What kind of values?" she asked, barely breathing. Margaret looked at her with eyes full of memory. Not conservative ones, not traditional ones, human ones. Values she felt were dying: kindness, humility, compassion, listening. She wanted you to grow strong but gentle, brave but loving, independent but not disconnected. Emma's heart stopped. "What kind of values?" she asked, barely breathing. Margaret looked at her with eyes full of memory. Not conservative ones, not traditional ones, human ones. Values she felt were dying: kindness, humility, compassion, listening. She wanted you to grow strong but gentle, brave but loving, independent but not disconnected. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. "She made him swear," Margaret said, voice trembling now. "Swear that he would protect you not only from danger, but from losing the softness she knew the world would try to steal from you. And your father, he took that promise too literally. He believed structure was the only way to shape kindness. He believed rules were the only way to keep your heart safe." Michael closed his eyes, grief washing over him. "I failed her," he whispered, "and I failed you." Emma felt her heart crack open at the edges. "No," she said softly, "you didn't fail." Michael looked at her, confused and broken. "You," she continued gently, "but you didn't fail." She wiped a tear that escaped down her cheek. "All this time,
I thought you were trying to suppress who I was, but you were trying, clumsily, painfully, to honor her." Michael's lips trembled. "I didn't know how else to do it." Emma shook her head, the truth sinking deeper. Maybe I wasn't the only one who grew up scared." Michael opened his mouth, but no words came. Emotion overwhelmed him, softening his usually composed face. Emma leaned forward slightly, her voice unsteady. "Dad, I'm not your little girl anymore, but that doesn't mean you've lost me." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and as soon as she said them, she realized they were true. Her father's expression broke. He brought a trembling hand to his chest, as if steadying a heart that suddenly beat too fast. Margaret watched them both, tears gathering in her eyes. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the wounds passed between generations are not from cruelty, but from love expressed imperfectly." Emma looked at her father again, really looked, and felt the weight of every unresolved moment between them shifting, turning into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. And perhaps, for the first time, that was enough.
The silence that settled over the table wasn't the tense, suffocating quiet that had filled the room earlier. It was gentler now, like the hush that follows a storm, the kind that allows wounded earth to breathe again. Emma took in a shaky breath and looked at her father, who seemed unsure whether he was allowed to meet her gaze. She offered the smallest of nods. It was enough. Michael's eyes lifted, and for the first time in many years, there was no defensiveness there, no frustration, no walls, only a fragile, trembling hope. Emma spoke softly, the sharpness gone from her voice. "I can't pretend everything is suddenly okay, and I'm not promising that we'll fix years of mistakes in one night." Michael nodded slowly, painfully. "I know. But," Emma's voice wavered, "I understand you better now, and I think, maybe, that's the first step." Her father's lips parted, but no sound came out. Emotion constricted his throat too tightly. Margaret exhaled with relief, her shoulders dropping after carrying the weight of decades. Her expression glowed with quiet gratitude. Gratitude that this moment had finally come. Gratitude that she lived to see it. Emma glanced around the room. The cold plates, the half-eaten food, the candles flickering low. The dinner that had begun with humiliation and anger now felt like a strange sanctuary of truth. This was not how she imagined reconciliation would look. But reality, she realized, was rarely as neat as the ideals she fought for. She turned back to her father. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Not for standing up for what I believe, but for never giving you a chance to explain, for not seeing that you were hurting too." Michael's breath broke, just slightly. "Emma, I'm sorry for everything, for the rules, for the fear, for not knowing how to talk to you without hiding behind old habits." His voice cracked. "I never meant to be the enemy." Emma felt tears spill over her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "Maybe neither of us was the enemy," she murmured. "Maybe we were just lost in different directions." Michael nodded weakly, grateful beyond words. Emma pushed her chair back and slowly stood. The room seemed to rise with her, the emotions swirling into something soft, warm, unfamiliar. She hesitated only a second before walking around the table. Michael froze, unsure, until she reached him. She didn't hug him tightly. She didn't collapse into him. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder. Gentle, hesitant, but real. Her first gesture of closeness in years. Michael closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the small but monumental touch. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible. Emma swallowed, her voice trembling. "For what?" "For giving me a chance," he said. She didn't reply.
because she couldn't trust her voice not to break. Instead, she stepped away and turned to Margaret. Her grandmother's eyes were wet with tears, her hands pressed together in trembling relief. Emma leaned toward her, letting her grandmother take her hands. "Thank you for telling me the truth," Emma said quietly. Margaret brushed a tear from Emma's cheek with a thumb softened by age. "The truth can be painful, querida, but sometimes pain is the only way love finds its voice." Emma felt her chest tighten again, but this time it wasn't anger or confusion. It was something deeper, something that felt like healing beginning to take root. She turned and looked back at her father. He stood slowly, uncertain, but she offered a faint smile, small but sincere. Hope flickered in his eyes. The room no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a crossroads. Messy, fragile, but full of possibilities they had all believed impossible just hours ago. Emma drew a deep breath and spoke softly, almost to herself. "Maybe we can try again." Michael nodded, emotion choking him too deeply for words. Margaret closed her eyes in gratitude. And with that, the wounds of years didn't disappear, but they stopped bleeding. And in the quiet that followed, for the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel like she was fighting her family. She felt like she was finally finding it.